Hello, my name is Vadim, and I live in a small town in northern Italy. I am 26 years old, and the last few years of my life have been filled with incredible adventures and discoveries. From an early age, I was passionate about the history and culture of Europe. My parents always supported my love for travel, and from my teenage years, I traveled to many countries, absorbing the spirit of ancient civilizations. After graduating from university with a degree in art history, I decided to fully immerse myself in the Italian way of life. Bidding farewell to my family and friends, I bought a one-way ticket and embarked on a journey that was to turn my entire life upside down. For the first few months, I traveled to major cities: Rome, Florence, Venice, Milan. I visited all the famous museums and historical sites, trying to absorb every drop of Italian culture. However, soon I realized that the true Italy was not hidden in the tourist-crowded centers but in the small, picturesque towns scattered throughout the country. It was to one of these little towns, nestled in the foothills of the Alps in northern Italy, that I headed. The small Chiusi turned out to be a real gem where time seemed to have stopped several centuries ago. Narrow streets paved with ancient cobblestones, small family shops and trattorias, the aromas of fresh pastries and coffee, all this created an incredible atmosphere that was so lacking in major tourist centers. Despite having very little money left in my pocket, I decided to stay in Chiusi for a while. To make ends meet, I got a job as a handyman in one of the local bakeries. The work was hard. I had to get up before dawn, knead huge vats of dough and unload hot loaves of bread from the large ovens. However, I was happy, for I had fully immersed myself in the Italian way of life, becoming a part of this small but colorful town. Thanks to my work in the bakery, I learned Italian quite quickly and befriended the locals. They accepted me as one of their own, warmly embracing my passion for their culture and traditions. In the evenings after work, we often gathered in one of the small trattorias, drinking homemade wine and having leisurely conversations about everything under the sun. One warm summer evening, as I was leisurely sipping wine in the company of my new friends from Chiusi, my old university classmate Marco unexpectedly joined us. Marco had also moved to live in this area of Italy. He had always been an adventurous and insatiably curious soul, so seeing his excited face, I immediately braced myself to hear some kind of thrilling story. "Vadim, my friend, you won't believe what I've found," Marco exclaimed, barely able to catch his breath. "A few kilometers from here, deep in the mountains, there is an ancient abandoned castle that once belonged to one of the most influential aristocratic families in Italy. They say it still contains incredible treasures and artifacts, as well as an entire library of rare ancient tomes." I must admit, at first I treated his words with skepticism, considering them just another fantasy of my restless friend. However, Marco was so enthusiastic about his find that he eventually infected me with curiosity, and I decided to join him in exploring the mysterious castle. The next day, at the crack of dawn, we gathered some provisions and set off, following the directions Marco had obtained from the locals. Our path lay through picturesque alpine valleys overgrown with ancient pines, past raging mountain streams and awe-inspiring rocky cliffs. With every new turn, more breathtaking views opened up, making me marvel again and again at the beauty of this region. And then, finally, after several hours of walking, we were presented with a truly grand sight. Atop a high hill, surrounded by a deep ravine, stood a mighty fortress with massive stone walls and majestic towers crowned with crenellated battlements. Even in its obvious neglect, the ancient castle radiated an aura of grandeur and power, making one tremble with delight. Incredible, simply incredible, was all I could utter as I gazed upon the scene before us. "But how will we get inside?" "Leave it to me," grinned Marco, pulling out a massive camping lantern and thick rope from his backpack. "We might not be able to get through the main gates, but I saw a hidden passage on the map, so adventure awaits us." With these words, he decisively headed towards the base of the hill, and I, without a shred of doubt, followed my reckless yet invaluable friend, and so began our thrilling exploration of the ancient dungeons, galleries, chambers, and towers of the abandoned fortress. Each new room held breathtaking discoveries: ancient tapestries with intricate patterns, carved oak chests with partially faded crests, entire libraries with folios on pages weathered by time, inscribed in long-forgotten languages. We literally roamed through the ruins of past grandeur, with each room bearing silent witness to bygone eras, while shadows of those who once dwelled here seemed to linger in dark corners. The excitement of our first encounter with the deserted fortress so captivated our minds that soon Marco proposed a completely insane idea: to spend several days within the castle walls, fully immersing ourselves in the atmosphere of those distant times when these massive stone walls were home to generations of noble families. Just imagine what an exhilarating challenge this will be for your blog, Marco fervently persuaded me. We'll take our tents, minimal supplies of food and water, lanterns, sleeping bags, and a camera for filming, and then we'll spend 3 days in the castle, as if we were the true lords of these lands, touching the mysterious lives of our ancestors. At first, I was skeptical, unable to fathom enduring such a long time in these damp, gloomy dungeons. However, my friend's adventurous spirit soon infected me, awakening an insatiable thirst for new experiences, and I agreed to his insane challenge. Over the next few days, we meticulously prepared for our journey into the past, gathering the necessary equipment and clearly dividing responsibilities. Marco volunteered to be our cook and brewer, while I was responsible for documenting everything on camera for the blog, as we decided to involve our subscribers in every moment of our adventure. And then the day came when our baggage was packed, and the sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the peaks of the Alpine mountains in crimson tones. We exchanged determined glances and set off, this time fully resolved to stay within the fortress walls not for a day or two, but for 3 long nights and days. After struggling to cross a deep ravine at the foot of the hill, we climbed to the summit and once again entered the mysterious citadel through the hidden passage, this time dispersing into different halls and chambers to set up camp. I spent the first night in the old throne room, pitching my tent right at the base of the stone throne, once towering over all the castle's inhabitants, while Marco settled in the servants' quarters on the lower levels. After some time after sunset, when the last rays of daylight faded on the horizon, we were enveloped in complete, primal darkness, in which our pocket flashlights seemed like tiny, solitary stars, barely dispelling the pitch-black darkness around us. Suddenly, this impenetrable blackness became palpably frightening, and an icy fear gripped me at the mere thought that it would become my sole ruler in the coming days. Somewhere in the distance, loud cries of nocturnal birds echoed, and under the vaults of ancient corridors, gusts of wind echoed them with prolonged, ominous howls, as if the malevolent spirits of antiquity were mocking our audacity, disturbing the centuries-old peace of their abode. I pressed the flashlight to my chest and tried to dispel the illusion, but the cold outside and inside became increasingly tangible. For the first time in my life, I pondered whether I had gone too far in my recklessness. Even for someone as adventurous as myself, this challenge might prove excessive. Yet, in the next moment, another feeling seized me, a stubborn defiance against ancient forces. It's just stones and wind, I convinced myself, mentally picturing the terror of medieval villagers on nights when every rustle outside the door threatened to be the claws of a dangerous predator. Pushing through the fear, I built a small fire in the center of the hall from ancient wooden planks, its comforting warmth and light becoming my true salvation from the surrounding darkness. Listening to the crackling of the logs and watching the dance of orange flames, I gradually calmed down and even began to be imbued with the romance of castle life at night. With the wind howling outside as accompaniment, I began working on a blog post, immersing my future readers in the atmosphere of ancient times. When the fates of people were decided in these fortress halls, the rest of the night flew by almost unnoticed in this immersion into historical fantasies, and with the first rays of sunlight breaking through the castle's battlements, all fears were safely dispelled. As our stay in the ancient fortress dragged on, my curiosity grew stronger. I longed to learn more about the history of this mysterious place before we returned to the modern world. Between snacks and night shifts by the fire, I began questioning Marco about all the legends and tales associated with the majestic castle. In the Middle Ages, this was the residence of one of the most powerful feudal families in northern Italy, my friend eagerly recounted, as if only waiting for my interest in the topic. Chronicles say that an entire dynasty of kings ruled these lands for centuries until it ended in a bloody tragedy. Marco paused for a moment, allowing me to digest the first pieces of knowledge, and then continued, increasingly capturing my imagination. The last of the royal line, young Fabrizio, had an unbridled passion for occult sciences and forbidden rituals. It is said he performed some blasphemous rite, attempting to attain immortality, but instead brought upon himself and his entire lineage a terrible curse. One night, the castle echoed with heart-wrenching cries, after which all its inhabitants vanished without a trace. Marco's eyes sparkled brightly at these words, causing a shiver to run down my spine. Some of the local residents who dared to enter the fortress the next morning claimed to have seen signs of struggle everywhere and bloody imprints on the walls. Since then, the castle has been shrouded in infamy, my friend's whisper suddenly cut through the night's darkness. They say the spirits of its fallen inhabitants still roam these halls, perpetually calling for revenge and thirsting for new victims. The fortress itself seems to have become a gateway to the realm of the dead, from where chilling moans and cries are heard at night. For a moment, a figure seemed to materialize in the flames of the fire, but Marco quickly dispelled my fears. Pay no attention, it's just old tales to add color, though who knows, perhaps there is some truth to them. He chuckled meaningfully, making me even more nervous. In the following days, even while engaged in the most mundane tasks, preparing small camp meals or inspecting the castle's chambers, I couldn't stop thinking about the dark history of the place we found ourselves in. Every time the echoes of the wind's howls reached us from the dark corridors, it seemed to me that these were not mere elemental gusts but the agonized cries of long-gone epochs. Once, while studying the remnants of ancient fresco paintings on the walls of one of the halls, I froze in silent horror at what I saw. On the time-worn walls were figures of faceless shadows, whose dreadful visage reminded me of all the tales of the spirits of the castle's deceased prisoners, thirsting for the blood of new victims. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that these were just nightmares of human imagination, I couldn't shake off the intrusive thought that the artist had captured something he had seen with his own eyes. A couple of days later, filled with growing inner tension, Marco and I seriously considered ending our historical challenge prematurely. The atmosphere of the castle had become utterly oppressive and frightening, and the half-ruined walls and vaults seemed to be a breeding ground for all sorts of sinister secrets and nightmares. However, our persistent curiosity and reckless desire to uncover the truth still kept us inside, eagerly listening to every echo of history hidden within the ancient stone. And then I remembered the ancient folios from the abandoned library that we had discovered during our first visit. Perhaps somewhere there, among the dusty manuscripts and scrolls, lay authentic evidence of long-gone days, capable of shedding light on the tragedy of the royal dynasty. With this thought in mind, I hurried to Marco's temporary camp to share my discovery. However, upon reaching our campsite, I was struck by my friend's desperate cries emanating from the nearest hall. Abandoning all belongings, I rushed to his call, catching sight in the dim light of faint lanterns of some dark figures following me. But at that moment, I was too concerned about Marco's fate. What I saw plunged me into shock and dread. Marco sat on the floor, his back pressed against the stone wall, pointing with a trembling hand somewhere to the side. His face was as pale as death, his eyes spinning wildly. I saw one of them, he could only whisper in response to my questioning gaze. They're here, they still inhabit these walls. According to Marco, he had entered the adjacent hall to inspect several ancient chests left from ancient times when suddenly a deathly pale figure, vaguely resembling a human, emerged from the dark shadow. Trembling with horror, my friend recounted how this creature emitted a viscous cold, like the most dreadful denizens of the underworld. It seemed to glow with a ghostly light and moved, leaving behind a trail of greenish mist. I froze, unable to move or call out to you. Marco spoke with fear in his eyes, and this thing, this entity, it moved straight toward me. I saw its clawed hand reaching for my face, ready to seize me with its icy fingers. I confess, I was overcome with uncontrollable terror then, and I almost ran out of the castle in a panic, escaping from all this madness. Only with great effort of will was I able to compose myself and try to calm Marco. Though I myself was deeply frightened, we spent the rest of that night sitting together, eagerly listening to every rustle from the corridors and hugging each other at the slightest movement of shadows. Even the campfire we had hastily built seemed to emit some ominous glow, as if mocking our human frailty. It was only with the first glimpses of dawn that we resolved to leave the walls of the accursed fortress. We had barely taken a few steps when we stumbled upon a pile of rubble lying directly on the floor, and further on were signs of struggle and shreds of clothing, as if someone had recently engaged in a serious altercation. Carefully navigating the obstacles, we moved on and soon safely exited the castle. We sat on the slope of the hill for quite some time, recovering from the nightmare of nocturnal visions, and our trembling hands frantically recorded all the details of what had happened on camera, trying not to miss the smallest detail. In the following days, discussions under our videos on Instagram sparked serious debates. Some viewers firmly accused us of staging and simple pranking, citing Marco's unnatural screams and deliberate shaking in the frame. Others fiercely defended us, acknowledging the natural authenticity of our frightened faces and dismissing any accusations of deceit. It had been a couple of months since that incredible night within the walls of the ancient castle, when Marco and I came face to face with something otherworldly and inexplicable. Though I tried my best to push those horrific visions out of my memory, they continued to haunt me, agitating my mind and plunging me into deep contemplation about the nature of what we had experienced. One evening, as I dozed off on my favorite couch in the usual solitary atmosphere, there was a knock on the door, and my old friend appeared on the threshold with the same sly smirk on his sun-kissed face. I sensed that you were once again immersed in philosophical reflection, so I decided to pay you a visit, Marco mockingly said, barging into the living room with a couple of bottles of strong wine. Soon, like in the old good times, we settled into comfortable armchairs, engaging in leisurely conversations and gradually delving into the alcoholic supplies. Naturally, the conversation quickly veered towards the topic of our ill-fated adventure, firmly imprinted in our minds. Well, tell the story again. As it happened, my companion demanded, giving me a shrewd look over his mug. Maybe together we can untangle this ball of horror and madness. Despite attempts to joke and change the subject, I couldn't resist Marco's curiosity and began to recount all the twists and turns of that memorable event once again. As I narrated, the ominous images of otherworldly entities and chilling scenes of our encounter with them became increasingly vivid before me, and that pale figure, glowing with some otherworldly light, how dreadful it was. Marco shuddered at the memories, and I was seized by new doubts. Listen, what if we didn't see projections of human imagination at all, but something that came to us from the depths of hell? I didn't know what to say, but then suddenly remembered an important detail that I had gradually started to forget. Wait a minute, but on that horrifying evening, I wasn't recording everything just on one camera. There was another, a backup, standing unattended in the adjacent hall, where we found signs of a struggle. I remember how Marco abruptly sat up straight in his chair, his eyes literally bulging with astonishment. Are you saying we have another recording, possibly clearer and more detailed? And you've been silent about this all this time? Before I could answer anything, my friend was already on his feet and rummaging through my belongings in search of the fateful memory card. Get everything you have immediately, and let's review these shots, he demanded decisively, unwilling to miss the slightest chance to unravel the mystery of that incident. After a few minutes of desperate searching, I finally managed to find the fateful flash drive with the second camera buried deep in my closet, and by that time, we had already moved to the living room, with Marco fiddling with the laptop, trying to connect it to the TV for optimal viewing. It's ready, he announced with undisguised excitement when the devices finally merged into a single multimedia system, and on the big screen flashed moments of captured images. Get ready, who knows what revelations await us. Within literally the first few seconds, I realized that it would not be just an ordinary viewing of that material that we had already studied countless times. Before us unfolded completely new, spine-chilling frames. On the screen, the same pale figures from the depths of hell were clearly visible, but now there were many more of them, and they surrounded some object on the floor, resembling either fragments of a sculpture or human remains. I gripped the armrests of the chair, unable to tear my eyes away from the overwhelming horror that pervaded every moment of this dreadful recording. And to think, initially it seemed that we would see only mundane shots of an evening camp and the exploration of an ancient castle, and here, a whole brood of monsters from another world was captured by my hand. Look, that creature over there is holding something resembling a bone, Marco exhaled, pointing with his finger at one of the ghastly, glowing beings. And aren't those our backpacks lying right next to it?